Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry we're a couple of minutes late here, but really delighted to be welcoming you to today's webinar with the ISE and Sova. And this is going to be a really interesting fireside chat style of conversation, taking us through red flags in early careers assessments. So I'm going to hand to Nicola now, who's going to take us through the agenda, and there'll be some time for Q&A at the very end as well. So please, everyone, do put your thoughts in the Q&A function so that we can answer those towards the end. Nicola, over to you.
Thanks, Georgia. Thank you for the introduction. And again, welcome to everyone who's joined us today. Really excited that we've got Callie Hudson from Liberty Global, who's agreed to join us this lunchtime for this session. Can't wait to hear what she's got to say. And so what better way to spend a Valentine's lunch break than pondering the pitfalls of early careers assessment. So I think everyone on this call has got a vested interest in getting early careers recruitment right. We know it's vital to attract, to engage and to select the right people in order to secure the best future for your employees and for the organisation. And today we're going to be discussing best practice and inviting these real world insights from Callie too. So I have been told to do a bit of housekeeping. So I think to get the best from the session, the best viewing experience will be gallery view today, and we recommend that you switch to that view, which will mean that you'll be able to see both me and Callie at the same time. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, if we could. So just kind of a bit of an introduction to myself and Callie. So I'm Nicola Tatham. Back one, sorry. There we go. I'm Nicola Tatham. I'm the Chief IO Psychologist here at Sova. I've been working in the field of assessment for, actually calculated it today, close to 30 years. And I love being able to talk shop with people that have got similar interests and passions. So I'm really looking forward to the next hour or so. I'm going to let Callie introduce herself to you now. So over to you, Callie.
Thanks, Nicola. So hi, everyone. As we've heard, my name is Callie Hudson. I am currently the Early Careers Recruitment Manager at Liberty Global. I find it's probably helpful to give a little bit of insight into who Liberty Global is. We are a world leader in converged broadband, video, and mobile communication services. However, you might know us as companies like Virgin Media O2 in the UK, Vodafone Ziggo in the Netherlands, Telenet in Belgium, Sunrise in Switzerland, and Virgin Media in Ireland. So all of these are leading consumer brands across Europe, and they are all part of the Liberty Global family. But we're also much more than just a telecoms company. So we are a company that is really big on global investment. So we have a ventures portfolio, part of our business, which includes over 75 companies with renowned brands like ITV, Plume, Lionsgate, and Formula E Racing Series. So some pretty recognizable names in there. But just like to give that context because quite often people are wondering kind of who we are. But to just give a bit of background to my role in particular, I manage our end-to-end recruitment process for all early careers programs across the UK and Netherlands. Within that remit, we recruit about 40 to 60 hires per year, which consists of graduates, interns, placements, and MBA grads. I also support several of our operating companies across Europe with their graduate recruitment campaigns as well. So quite a busy role, which I've been doing this now for about 1.5 years. And prior to this, I was actually working in the early careers team at Virgin Media O2, and I was there for about 3 years. And when I started out there, I was started as a early careers administrator and then worked my way up to be an early careers recruiter, where I was leading on the recruitment primarily of the field technician apprentices across the UK. So kind of with that combined experience, I've got about 5 years within the industry. But over this time, I've just become really passionate about this sort of early career space and the work that I do. But I've also definitely seen kind of my share of kind of red flags and pitfalls. So I'm looking forward to this session today and opening up that topic a little bit more.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. I think it is really useful for people to have that background about the organisation you're working for and a bit more about your role. So thank you. And then we just wanted to skip on to the next slide, if we may, just to give any of you who don't already know Sova just a little bit of background about who we are. I'm just going to wait for the slide to move. So in a nutshell, we are a precision talent assessment software for in-house recruitment teams to use. Our talent assessment platform, it marries the sort of scientific accuracy with innovative technology. So it's where we see interactive assessments, video interviews, virtual assessment centres combine into that one comprehensive experience. So we work with organisations like Vodafone, Unilever, nationwide to help streamline their early careers hiring, while trying to ensure an engaging and fair candidate experience so that they can then make these smarter and more data-driven hiring decisions. A lot of those points I've just made will end up coming up in the conversation, and we'll be digging a bit deeper into some of those key terms. It's all going to be discussed from that sort of frontline practitioner perspective as part of our conversation. So just moving on to the agenda, just as a reminder on the next slide. So what are we going to be covering today? So what are those red flags in the hiring process, and what should employers be looking for and be wary of? How can we mitigate? How can we plan for them? How can we be proactive about that? And then, of course, what happens if we ignore them? What are the risks of ignoring them? And then moving on to a really interesting topic around what some of the trends and best practices today in early careers assessments. And then we've got plenty of time, we hope, for Q&A at the end. So we want this to be a relatively interactive session. And that you will be able to submit questions to us throughout, and we'll try to answer them at the time, or we'll save them if it feels more sensible to save them for the Q&A at the end, and we've got 10 minutes or so for that. So we just move on to that it's my final slide actually, before we get into the conversation. So we're going to start with a question to you. So your responses won't be visible to anyone else, so please do try to be as open and honest as you can here. So the question that I've got for you is, what have been the biggest pitfalls in your early career hiring? So if you answer this via the chat, it will come just to the panelists and to us as the host. So colleagues and associates that are on the session won't be able to see any of your responses. But we're just really interested to see whether your feedback links to the conversation that we have as well. And we will collate and summarise that for the end of the session. So yeah, question is, what have been the biggest pitfalls in your early career hiring? So I think it's a really interesting topic, and looking forward to seeing the results of that. So yeah, feel free to be as honest and open as you can. So onto the fireside chat, as we've called it. I guess the first thing is to define what we mean by red flags. So I guess put simply, they are those early warning signs or indicators of problems, risks, or negative outcomes. In our dress rehearsal for this, we found that Callie and I had the potential to move around quite a lot in this topic. So we've tried to create a bit of structure for ourselves, and hopefully that will make things easy for you to follow. And we're going to look at this through the lens of the recruitment funnel, from attraction all the way through to hiring and even onboarding as well. So can't promise we'll stay on track, but we will try. So Callie, if we start perhaps by thinking about that first point around the attraction piece, what are some of the red flags that you've encountered in this regard?
Yeah, so I think, when talking about attraction, I think the first thing that comes to mind is talking about job adverts. So I think within job adverts, obviously, when you're posting these, you're wanting to attract people to the role, attract people to the business. However, you have to be really cautious that you're not just adding things kind of make the role sound appealing and make people kind of want to apply to it. It's really important to try and be transparent and give a representative view of the role, but of course the organization as well. And kind of in line with that, something else is just kind of often if you're just writing up an advert and not doing any sort of checks or due diligence on the language in the advert, I think that's definitely a major red flag, and something to kind of really be aware of.
Yeah, and I think increasingly the neurodiversity as well and accessibility, and just reviewing job ads through that lens is really important as well, in terms of ensuring you're not immediately reducing your potential talent pool by putting, like you said, certain language and words in there that could immediately turn people away and think that this isn't for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, really that language piece is really important when you're looking at your adverts, and then kind of making sure that you're being true to what the role is, but also making sure that you're as inclusive as you can be within that language.
Yeah, yeah, all sounds very familiar, and I'm sure a lot of other attendees on this call that will resonate with them as well. What about, from that's the very early, I'm writing this job description, what does it need to look like? What about how you then do the attraction piece? Are there any red flags that you've come across from that perspective?
Yeah, I think if you're just when you're going to like go to market, I guess casting your net in the world of early talent, if you're always kind of sticking to the same approach year after year, I would say that's definitely a major red flag, as the market, as we all know, is constantly changing. So you need to be always reviewing kind of your advertising opportunities and where you're kind of attracting talent. So it's really important that you are looking at that and kind of seeing what new ways you can recruit and attract people instead of kind of sticking to the same approach year after year.
Yeah, okay. And we'll probably come back to some of that as we move down the conversation, look at some of those other areas for discussion. So moving more into the sort of recruitment and assessment side of things, when it comes to recruitment, what are some of the other red flags and pitfalls that you would highlight to people?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I think about is probably not considering a candidate's potential. So if you're instead kind of really focused on looking at for someone that's going to tick every single box versus looking at the aptitude to grow skill set, I think that's definitely a big red flag. It's really important that assessors and decision makers in the process are approaching assessing candidates thinking about, is this a coachable aspect? As I think that's often forgotten in early careers roles, that these are roles that are for development and growth. So we should be approaching the recruitment process with that in mind.
Yeah, completely understand that. And again, something that we might come back to further down the line as well. So if you talked about how everything changes so quickly with new technology, etc. What about that sort of the broader recruitment process?
Yeah. So I think something else that's, I guess, can be often a pitfall is not reviewing your recruitment process. So additionally, obviously, looking at that candidate potential, but also reviewing the end-to-end process each year. So it's really important that with the market changes that you are kind of reviewing and making sure that it's still fit for purpose, that it's still relevant for the people that you're wanting to bring into the business. So often you might get kind of feedback from candidates and managers about kind of the challenges that they've seen in the process, and kind of ignoring that sort of feedback, I definitely think is a kind of big pitfall in that sort of process.
So if you're looking for assessors to buy into the process, then you've kind of got to be listening to their feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it works two ways, doesn't it? Obviously, as they come to you as the kind of the expert in the field, but you need to kind of take what they're saying on board as well. It's really important.
Yeah, okay. And with regards to assessors, any red flags and potential pitfalls, when you've got people that are being used day in, day out as assessors?
Yeah, I think I imagine a lot of people will have experienced and be aware of, assessor bias. I think it's probably one of the biggest red flags in kind of in any sort of recruitment, really. And it's unfortunately quite common for people to get distracted by, maybe their personal opinion of a candidate versus that performance or that potential for the role. So that's something, again, we'll probably, when we get down to the next piece, kind of circle back around that. But I think it's definitely a big one to be aware of. And I think it's probably at the forefront of everyone's mind when you're doing recruitment, is that bias piece.
Yeah. And a lot that we can do to avoid or reduce that as much as possible, which again we'll come back to when we talk about mitigations. And then more broadly, the candidate experience. No one is going to dispute that is hugely important at the moment. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think candidate experience is essential. I think, and it's not even just thinking about the candidate experience from the perspective of the candidates you're going to hire and make those offers to. And I think that's where people potentially fall down, is that they are just really focusing on those people that are ultimately getting the offers at the end, and potentially neglecting the candidates that are unsuccessful. And I think it's really important to kind of make sure that you're giving a good candidate experience across the board, regardless of the outcome, as obviously candidates are going to talk about their experience.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a lot easier for them to talk to people on the other side of the world now than it ever was before. So that word can spread quite quickly, can't it? So I guess, if we're going back to that funnel, then we talk about, you've made an offer to somebody and then they come along and they join Liberty Global. I think one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that concept of being able to link their assessment to their onboarding and to their development plans. Would you agree that that's a potential issue if you don't think of it from that perspective, that holistic view?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge pitfall if you're only looking at it, I guess, like in a siloed approach where you're just looking at recruitment as recruitment and then kind of the program as program. I think it's really important to kind of have that holistic view and kind of see it end to end, making sure that the recruitment process is reflective of the plans for once they're on program and how you want to develop those people. I think it's, yeah, definitely really important. That's something that we're always looking at in our team as well and trying to figure out ways that you can best kind of make sure that the team is understanding both sides.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just such a waste of data and time to not bring all of that information into the onboarding. And I know that's something that you are particularly passionate about within your business and something that you do try and mitigate. So I guess with that in mind, we've hinted at a lot of the mitigation strategies that might come from some of these potential red flags. So I guess one really, it's probably unfair to ask this as such an open question, but what sorts of things can people do to prevent some of these red flags from occurring, and what actions have you taken? The attraction, maybe that's probably a sensible way to do this.
Start the same where we did before. So yeah, if you're looking at attraction, so the first thing I had mentioned before was adverts and your advertising. So I think you want to make sure that you are showcasing that role in a true light, as I kind of said before. So I'd say something that we try and do is kind of highlight potential projects or pieces of work that the incumbent might take part in. It just kind of brings the role to light a little bit. Something that we like to do as well, which I think is really useful, is using testimonials in your job advert. So having current employees in the role or previous employees in the role actually give their kind of thoughts and feedback about what attracted them to it or what they've been working on and what they enjoy. I think just having it kind of from the words of not the recruiter is definitely really helpful in the candidate market. And kind of on the topic when we spoke about language and kind of being aware of any candidates, being sure that we're inclusive. I think it's important to take advantage of the technologies that exist. So there's lots of different tools that you can utilize to support this. One that we use in particular is called Textio. So we use it actually for all roles at Liberty Global. So you just can upload your job advert and it analyzes the advert, has a look at your language used, and it just makes recommendations to you to kind of make sure that it's being inclusive. And that way you can kind of obviously boost the potential pipeline that you're going to get into the role.
Yeah. And what about where you go to source candidates from? There's a question popped up. I don't know whether you've seen it yet. I'll ask you the question first, and then we'll come to the question that does link really nicely to this. You know, is it still all about campus hiring, or where do you go to sort of increase that net so that you're attracting the right people?
Yeah, so I think the big thing, and this is something that I'm going to be working on kind of for our next recruitment campaign as well, is really looking at the data of the past couple of years of where you've been seeing applications and offers coming from, and just identifying if there's any areas in particular that we've kind of had minimal return on investment, and in turn also those places where maybe we've had a really great ROI. So I think it's really important to be looking at that data. Like I said, that's something that we're going to be looking at for our next season and seeing is it that we should be kind of sticking to our campus recruitment, or should we kind of be broadening out that sort of spectrum? And I think with that piece, what's really important and definitely on my list of what I'm going to be doing as well is bringing this data forward to kind of our senior leaders and stakeholders to get their buy-in, because I think that's something that's really important. If you're going to shake things up and change the way that you're advertising, you always want to have that buy-in from your senior leaders as well.
And dare I ask, how, is that about the data and the ROI? Is that something that really helps?
I think so. I think because you can obviously go in and as a subject expert try and say that, I think that we should be doing this. But if you've got kind of the data over the past couple of years that really supports what you're saying, that's just going to really, I think, help your case to kind of move in the way that you want. So I think the data, I think, as we said at the beginning, that's something that we can't ignore, is that there's so much data that you can use, and you definitely want to kind of utilize that to your advantage.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to jump to one of the questions now. It's actually got put in the chat, but I can still see this. So this is good. So question is, what are the new ways of attracting young talent that really work for you? There seems to be a lot of talk of micro influencers and TikTok. Have you tried any of these? Any response to that off the top of your head, Callie?
So, I mean, we've not yet tried anything with micro influencers or TikTok, but I've seen a lot of kind of research about that's what a lot of companies are doing. So we are looking at kind of more just getting into the space of social media, because I think with early careers roles, obviously a lot of the talent you're attracting is Gen Z, and there's a lot of research that shows that they are using social media channels, so using things like Instagram to kind of to find out more about the company. So we're looking at kind of trying to maybe branch into that space a little bit more in the next year, because that's someplace that we've not kind of been in the past. So that's what we're looking at. But I mean, TikTok is also, I think, a great one. I think there's lots of things that obviously I think students use it often to kind of look up potentially for feedback from other people in the roles versus just the employer. So I think those spaces, you just need to be aware that obviously it's not just what you're posting on them, but it's what your employees or people that have had experiences with you are saying as well.
Which links back to what you were saying about the employer brand and giving a good experience, whether they get the job or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very easy to be to be dismissed as through someone's TikTok account. Okay, so let's stick in with these mitigation strategies. We talked about the attraction. What about recruitment and assessment? Obviously, you went through quite a few potential red flags there, including potential making changes based on data, in the assessment centre changes, that kind of thing. So do you want to just talk us through some of your thoughts on red flags in that regard and how we can mitigate for them?
Yeah, so I think we have spoke about that, looking at the potential of candidates. So I guess recognizing what your success criteria is for the roles is really important. So really establishing that kind of framework of what you're assessing and what you're looking for in the candidates. But also, as I said, about not kind of looking at things in a silo, but looking at the program itself that you're hiring for. So looking at what skills you're going to be developing on the program. It's really important to look at that whole journey so you understand what you need to actually be assessing in those early stages. And like I said, I think it's really about potential in early careers roles and kind of how you think that they could grow into that role. Something that we like to look at is learning agility. It's something that's really massively important. And it's really about how the candidate has the potential to be successful in the role and, of course, in your business.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, looking at this from my psychologist's perspective, one of the ways that we can really help to improve with that success criteria and the objective measurement is undertaking things like validation studies. We might have a gut feel for what's predicting success best, when we take people through to assessment centres and whether they get offers, etc. But the proof of the pudding really is in the data, isn't it? To be able to track those people through the development programs as well, to look at which elements of your assessment process are actually predicting the most successful candidates. There's a lot of data that you can use to get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to not, like I said, not ignore those data pieces, to be able to look at it. At the end of each recruitment campaign, you can look at it from the recruitment perspective to see if there were anything in those validation studies that came out about any particular behaviors that kind of were good predictors of success for offering. But then, like you said, it's important to kind of continue that through once they're on program to see if they kind of continue and if you see any kind of those pieces kind of leading through. So just not kind of cutting it off and having them be separate, I think is definitely really important.
Yeah. And also using that data to look at any potential adverse impact in the process as well. Another kind of potential risk there, if you're using an assessment that perhaps discriminated unfairly against one particular subgroup, just building that database to be able to go back and review that, on a relatively regular basis. We also talked about assessors earlier, when there's potential risk with lack of consistency, for example, or any sort of unconscious bias. There are steps we can take. What sort of things have you done to help mitigate around assessor bias and the like?
Yeah, so for us to try and mitigate these sort of things, we always provide assessor training ahead of any of our assessment centres. So which is, I think, really critical, regardless of if they assessed last year for our graduate campaign. At the beginning of each season, they need to go through the training again. So it just kind of gives them all the kind of tools and materials to understand, obviously, what's required of them. But also we always have a section in there that talks about bias and making sure that they're kind of aware of that and bringing it to the forefront of their mind. We also provide kind of comprehensive guides for our assessors. So that's kind of for all of the exercises that they're going to be assessing. We have detailed guides that gives kind of that framework that we're assessing against. But it also means that we've got scripts for like the interviews, which I think this is really important because then candidates are all having the same experience. And I think if you've got kind of no script for the interview, you can get some candidates that might be able to showcase more of their skill set because they've gotten questions that are more suited to that. So I think kind of having that standardized approach just helps that process. And then as well, we also provide, regular check-ins on our assessment center days. So at the start of the day, we do an assessor briefing. So we just make sure all the assessors kind of understand what's expected again, just kind of reiterating those pieces. So even though they had that training, I think it's just really important to continuously check in just to make sure that everyone understands what's expected and there's no kind of question marks.
Yeah, and I guess over the longer term, depending on volumes, you can also throw data into the mix there as well, and you can start to interrogate that data to see if you do have, particular either assessors or exercises that perhaps aren't, operating as objectively, or maybe just not using the full, scoring range, something, things like that you can follow up on with data.
Yeah,
I guess we did talk about accessibility, neurodiversity within the red flags section earlier. I guess there's also, that is a factor that we can mitigate to give our candidates the best experience. How do you handle that with things like reasonable adjustments and communication with candidates?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important piece to just be really open and clear with candidates about providing reasonable adjustments. So in all of our communication to candidates, we let them know if they do require reasonable adjustments, we give them the steps they need to take to kind of for us to support them. So essentially it's just reaching out to our team and letting them know what their situation is and what adjustments they might need. So I think the biggest piece is being really clear to candidates and not kind of hiding the fact that they can ask for adjustments and ask for support if they need it. We always try to accommodate at every stage. So whether it's kind of the earlier stages like the online assessment or the video interview, or the assessment center itself, just kind of providing adjustments wherever they're needed. Mm-hmm. So I know in the past we've had candidates before that struggled with kind of the video interview when it's not a live video interview. So we're able to kind of offer them a live video interview as an alternative, or providing them additional time at an assessment center. So it's all about kind of giving the adjustments kind of bespoke for each candidate. And I think that's also kind of, I guess, then feeds into kind of the design of your assessments as well. You just need to keep D&I at mind when you're kind of designing those pieces as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about making the right decisions, using data to inform which assessments you're going to be using where. Yeah. I guess, you talked about communication with candidates and, giving them the opportunity to raise, questions if they're looking for reasonable adjustments, etc. With regards to the broader candidate experience, there's been a big issue throughout our conversations. Yeah. What mitigations have you been able to put in place around that to, ensure that candidates are getting the best experience, and if they're not?
So I think one of the things is just thinking about kind of your timelines for recruitment. So obviously a big thing, candidates always want to know kind of the outcome of each stage pretty much the second they've completed it. Obviously that's not always possible, but it's just trying to be really clear with them about your timelines at every stage. So if they kind of get an invitation to an online assessment, letting them know how long they have to complete that. Once they've completed it, letting them know how long it's going to be until they hear the next stage. So it's just kind of really setting those expectations and being really clear. Because I think the speed to hire is really important. You obviously don't want to keep your candidates waiting around. And that just feeds directly into that candidate experience piece that we were talking about, that regardless of the outcome, you want the candidates to walk away having a good experience. So even if they were unsuccessful, you want them to leave and say, oh, I didn't get the job, but I had a really great experience. Yeah. And I think in turn with that, you can kind of capture feedback at every stage. So even if it's just kind of short little pulse checks after each stage to just kind of gauge kind of how they found that process. It's really useful, because then again, you can pull that data forward to see if there's any specific stages that maybe aren't scoring as well, and see what improvements you might need to make. Yeah,
and that's something that you do and that you advocate other people. Do you find that really
useful? Absolutely. I think it's I think the candidate feedback is key, because obviously you can think that you're having a great process, but it's really down to that candidate experience. So you want to kind of capture that at any point that you can, and I definitely recommend that you're capturing that as much as you can.
What do you do if you get really bad candidate feedback at any point? I presume it's all anonymous and it's just dealing with it.
Yeah, so it's all anonymous. So it's not like we can link it back to a specific candidate. So from that perspective as well, obviously, it doesn't mean you can't necessarily go back to the candidate and kind of come back to them on what they've said. But it's then you're just looking at that piece and seeing kind of if this was just a kind of a one-off situation that they've reported, or if we're actually seeing more people with having this sort of issue that they've presented. But I think it's important not to ignore it, even if it is just one person saying it, because it might just be other people had that negative experience and they've just not told you. So I think it's really important to not ignore those sort of pieces that are coming up.
And this links to another question that's just come in. The question is, what do you think is the best way of capturing the candidate feedback? Do you want to talk us through your thoughts on that?
So I think it depends on what platforms you're using for your recruitment process. But if you're using a platform that has the opportunity to just add those quick surveys that kind of come up immediately after they've finished it, I think those are most useful, kind of the immediate sort of feedback. Yes. Versus if they've completed the online assessment, you don't want to then ask them a couple of days later for feedback. I think if you just ask them for feedback kind of immediately once they've done it, I think that's what's, I guess, more useful, and you might get more accurate information. And then you're also probably just going to get more people to complete it as well. So I think it's probably a bit dependent on what you're using. But if you can capture it kind of immediately afterwards, that's, I think, what I would say. And like I said, it can be something quick. It can just be kind of a quick scale of 1 to 5. How was your experience? And you don't need to go into too much detail on it.
Yeah. I guess the downside to capturing it at that point is that candidate is still trying to impress you. So you might not hear the real truth. It might be, a follow-up survey could potentially be useful a bit further down the line, but that's sort of bigger picture view of their experience. And be interesting to
it's about like working out your timeline of when you're kind of going to be communicating to them to just make sure that it all makes sense from the candidate side.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to look at, when they've got the offer versus not got the offer. Do we see differences in the candidate feedback? If you've done a good job, we shouldn't, people,
absolutely,
still be the experience should be the same whether they got the job or not. Excellent, thank you. So loads of different mitigation ideas there. Anything else you wanted to sort of make a point about on any of that side of things, Callie, or should we move on to the next section?
I think we can move on. I feel like we could probably talk about kind of potential mitigation things for ages. I think there's lots of things that you can do, but I think we've covered a lot of the key ones I want to call out.
Yeah, you could absolutely delve into any of those and have a whole separate conversation on it, couldn't you? Okay, so that's been really useful. Thank you. So now we want to think about the impact of getting this wrong. If we ignore the red flags, what impact could this have? So I guess my question to you is, what are the longer term consequences of ignoring these red flags on the organisation's talent pool and the organisation's overall success?
I think probably the biggest thing that comes to mind about a long-term consequence is the negative impact it could have on your diversity and inclusion within the business. So if you're kind of not having that inclusive language in your adverts, or you're not reviewing your recruitment processes every year, there's a lot of things that we spoke about that would negatively impact that diverse talent pool that you could have coming in. So I think probably one of the biggest things that I would call out is the effect it would have in the D&I space.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And then just limiting that diversity at all those different stages. If you make any of the wrong decisions, just losing out on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talent, yeah. And then obviously the damage to the employer brand. That's not insignificant, is it?
No, so we spoke a lot about that candidate experience. So if they are having that negative experience, you might get people going on to the social channels like we spoke about, and they're going to talk poorly about your company, saying that they had this terrible experience. So it's really important that you are kind of making sure that you're taking care of the people in the process to just protect that employer brand piece as well, because obviously you also just don't want to give candidates that experience, but you also don't want to get that negative image in the market either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for me, the biggest potential consequence of this is that you're bringing the wrong people into the business, or into the wrong people into the wrong jobs. If any of these things are missed, then that's a potential consequence for the business and for the business's success longer term. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think it's all of those different pieces that we spoke about. If you're not kind of considering the role that you're hiring for in that recruitment process, then there's no telling that you're going to bring in the right people. So it's all about kind of thinking about the investment that you're making in these people. Are they going to be the right people for the business, for the growth that you're looking for? So I think if you ignore all these things, then you do have that huge risk of not having the right people join. Yeah,
and you just talked about investment, but there's getting the right people into the right job. But the impact of getting it wrong is clearly there's that return on investment piece as well. We know how expensive it is to recruit someone and then bring the onboard and development you know, into that cost as well, and then look at the impact on productivity if you've got the wrong person in role. That's like a really difficult message to hear, isn't it? You know, it's not just getting the right person in the role, it's the impact that's going to have on the organization's success overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously you're hiring these people into a program that's going to last at least 2 years or more. So it's kind of thinking about that making sure that they are the right fit. So obviously, because the business does rely on these people to come in and support the business and support projects that are happening. So you want to make sure that you are bringing in those right people for that piece.
Yeah. And on that more human level, somebody that's not right for the role is not going to be thriving in that role, and they're not going to be happy. You know, it's going to affect, you know, their own well-being as well. So, you know, nobody wins if we don't get recruitment right. Okay, so I think was there anything else in terms of those sort of long-term consequences? I think it's another massive area. Is there anything else that you wanted us to bring to the fore today?
So I think those were some of the, some of the key pieces that are really important to think about that could kind of be the consequence. But I think those are the big ones. You know, DE&I, the damaging of your employer brand, bringing the wrong people into the business, and that ROI piece. I guess those are some of the key pieces that come to mind.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we are now on to segment 4, where this is our penultimate agenda point. So it's another really interesting topic. And you know, what we want to do is just have a consideration of some of the trends that you're seeing currently, you know, in relation to early careers recruitment. So what are some of those trends that might help address or avoid some of those red flags that you're responding to at the moment or putting in place?
So I think one of the trends is just all the research that's coming out around Gen Z that's coming out. So I think there's a lot of things that are in the market that's saying kind of what they're looking for in an employer and a role. And I think it's really important to look at that data that's there and just definitely not ignore it, and see how you can kind of adapt your recruitment process, your programs, to make sure that those are fit for the kind of the talent that's out there. I think that it's definitely changing. I think in the past couple of years, I think there's quite a few things that probably changed that, including kind of the students that, you know, were at university during COVID. I think that they, I guess it's a different sort of candidate pool than it was before COVID. And I think it's just something that you need to really be aware of. And I think other employers are probably seeing a very similar thing, that the candidate pool is just quite different. And the mindset of those sort of candidates has definitely changed as well.
Can you embellish on that? Is there anything that you could share on what those changes feel like?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that just, I guess, what's important to candidates is really changing. So kind of they're looking for more, I guess, maybe development opportunities and things like that. And we're seeing just also that the pieces that how they're acting kind of on program as well is probably changing a bit. So you're just noticing kind of different behavioral pieces as well. So from the perspective of an early careers team, we have to look at what can we do for these people once they're on program to make sure that we're supporting them in the best way possible. And I think that there's probably lots of different pieces that you can kind of pull out that you're seeing differences. But I think the big thing is looking at, we know that there are changes in kind of the student's mindset. So what can we do to support them best once they come onto the program?
So that takes us right back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this, which is that holistic, joined up approach to recruitment and onboarding and development. And do you want to share, I don't know whether it's unique to Liberty Global, but I know that you dabble in both sides of the
so
like a
we're
really thing to do.
Yeah, so we're actually this year we're kind of trying something to get just exposure to both sides, because as I said, that's really important. So my colleague that works on the program side, our program manager, are doing a little bit of kind of a role swap this year, where she's going to be leading on the Netherlands graduate recruitment. That way she can kind of get that holistic view and see the grad recruitment process end to end. And then I'm going to be supporting with the leading our induction and our onboarding for our graduates this year. So I think that's something that for us is just quite exciting. Not only obviously gives you a new opportunity for trying something different, but also just gives you that full exposure and that full view of kind of what we're doing. And I think that goes back to what I said about making sure that you're not working in those silos. I think it's really important to know what's going on both sides, just from the perspective of that's how you're going to be able to, I think, mitigate a lot of these pitfalls that we've been talking about, is if you do kind of have that full understanding of the program and the recruitment.
Yeah. And then it just creates that more joined up and then highly likely to be more successful approach.
Yeah.
Are there any other trends, you know, that you want to talk about?
So I think something that we've seen that I think from people that I've spoken to in the industry, that we've actually this year seen just huge spikes in application numbers as well. So I think there's a lot of things out there that say kind of potential ideas as to what it would be. And I know, Nicola, we spoke about kind of what some of those things might be that, you know, it might be that obviously there's that backlog of people that were at university during COVID and graduated and decided not to take on a grad scheme straight away, or kind of just took some time off. So we're just seeing kind of huge volumes of applicants, which is obviously then that much more difficult to manage, to make sure that you're keeping to those tight timelines. But it's just something that we've definitely noticed this year, that the application numbers have just kind of doubled from what we had last year.
Wow. Yeah. I understand that that's kind of happening. It's not just yourselves that are experiencing that either. That is a trend that's occurring at the moment, which I guess does make building that really effective and efficient recruitment and assessment process even more important when you're dealing with such big numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, these candidates are applying for lots of roles as well, so obviously they're not just necessarily looking at your role. So I think that kind of plays into wanting to make sure you're keeping those timelines tight and having that good communication, because you want to make sure that you're going to kind of stand out to the candidate in the process.
This is, I've got the results in from the question that we asked people earlier, but one of them does kind of relate to this, in that, do you have any issues around candidates that might think they've applied for one role but actually they've applied for, is there any confusion around where, you know, which role? Obviously you've got multiple different roles available. Is there any issue around that you're seeing with candidates not really knowing?
So we haven't had that too much. I think what helps is just trying to make sure that you've got kind of the separate advertisements and make sure that they're kind of really clear. But I think that is quite common if you do have it kind of where it's not necessarily clear kind of which role is which, where you can have that confusion. But I think just having those clarity in what you're posting is then just going to help you with that sort of piece, and making sure that they fully understand. And then as well, kind of something else we do is, before our assessment centres, we brief candidates on what to expect at the assessment centre, and they have the opportunity to ask questions. So if they're a bit unsure about the role, they've got that chance then as well.
Yeah. That's another really nice mitigation to bring in as well. It's all about, you know, offering candidates the opportunity to, I mean, a key theme that I've got from the conversation that we've had is around communication. And I think one of the things that I'm thinking here is it's around ensuring that candidates know exactly what to expect and when to expect it, and giving them access to information that helps them understand more about the process, gives them the opportunity to practice psychometric tests, for example, or to understand more about what they might experience at the assessment centre. So I think, all those things are really closely related. I will move on to the results. We've got no drum roll, but there's 4 key sort of threads that have come out of the questions. I'd be interested to see whether any of these, and some of them will resonate with you. You've talked about them already, Callie, but number 1 was the number of dropouts, and actually experiencing more dropouts from diverse candidates. Number 2 was the one that I just mentioned around the volumes and candidates not really knowing what they've applied for, related to the trend about the spike in applications. I guess people are perhaps taking that more scattergun approach to where they're applying. The 3rd point was attracting the right gender balance. Again, you talked about some of the mitigations around that. Is that something that you do see in your roles, gender balance?
I think that's always hard. There's areas, I think, like in finance and tech, which are areas that we have programs in. We tend to just see more men applying for those roles, which is really hard, because they're both areas of the business that we want to see more women coming into. But it just seems to be kind of year after year that we do see that. So we try and look at kind of what can we do to bring more women in? Are there kind of specific events or activities we can get involved in where we can just speak to more women to kind of let them know about the opportunities and kind of, I guess, open their mind to what roles are out there. But I think it's definitely a common one that we see as well.
What sort of steps do you take in that regard then, to sort of, reach out to more females?
So it's a lot of times just working, speaking to universities and seeing kind of, a lot of universities have obviously women's networks, so they might be specific for tech or for finance, but universities are really helpful with those sort of networks. We've also in the past just looked at alternative ways of, there's lots of, I think, other companies out there that kind of do specific promotions to bring more women into the workforce. So it's just looking at those sort of things. We're always kind of just seeing what things that we can try, because I think there's always something new to try, but it's just kind of finding the right thing that does work to bring those women in. But additionally, I think it's that piece around what you're saying in your adverts, making sure that it is still appealing for women as well, because then that's why we use Textio, because it helps kind of let us know if we've got too feminine or too masculine of a tone, just making sure we're getting that balance just right.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So yeah, they were the 4 themes that came out. There's a number of dropouts, and dropouts being from diverse candidate populations, the volume of candidates and not really knowing what they've applied for, attracting the right gender balance, and hiring manager bias was a theme that came out here. So I think that some nice mitigations that you described there, and also data interrogation that can happen post hoc to learn from the past experiences really of assessment centres and interviews. I think that gets us to the end of the questions that I wanted to ask you. So I was going to open the floor if there are any questions from people that have dialed in. There's one that's just landed. Callie, we're struggling with getting that senior buy-in from shifting the focus away from the traditional campus fairs to other channels. What tips can you share on that, around that sort of senior buy-in for it's a bit a bit of a mindset?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, and kind of we spoke a little bit about it before, but I think it's really around being able to showcase the data behind where you're actually getting the best investment from where you're going out to. So obviously the kind of traditional way is kind of going to campus careers fairs and those sort of pieces, but there's lots of other avenues that you can go down. So I think it's looking at obviously showcasing how many applications you're actually getting from going to these careers fairs. So if you're able to kind of track that in your application, or if you're just capturing leads at those events, you can then showcase kind of that this is kind of what we've gotten from capturing leads at that. That's how many transferred into applications and what transferred into offers. And you can showcase that you might be investing quite a lot into that space, but actually not getting anything in return. You're not getting any offers. And then bring forward, I guess, the alternative ideas of kind of the digital sort of advertising you might be able to do, and some of the reach that you might have. I think that's just what we're seeing, like I said, with a lot of the things moving to kind of social media, what students are looking for, that there's a lot you can do within that space to kind of maybe shift some of that investment. But I think it's all about being able to showcase that data to get the kind of senior buy-in. I think that's going to be the most important part.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I guess when you talk about the data and the ROI, also interrogating that data to look at diversity as well. So are the particular areas where, if you've got more, if you're trying to recruit more females, is there an area that works better with females than males?
Absolutely,
for example, as well. Thank you. Question for me: what is the pitfall you've most commonly seen in early careers recruitment across Sova clients? Great question, and difficult to prepare for it when you're reading it at the same time. I think for me, one of the key things, it's about doing a really good job of understanding what you need from those candidates. A one-size-fits-all competency framework that sits across the whole organization might be okay, but you really do need to understand what you want from those candidates in order for them to be successful. And it's only when you've established that, if you get that wrong, then nothing else is going to work. You need to know what those sort of skills, those behaviors are that you need from those candidates. And actually talking back to what Callie was saying earlier, that potential as well. So they might have a really impressive CV, but have they got the potential to shine in the organisation with the right coaching, the right development? Because they are, they're entering a development programme, I guess. So that for me is one of the key things. And then using that to design an assessment process that measures those key success factors, not just plucking it out of thin air and doing what you've always done, using that data, using those previous validation studies, never standing still, so looking at what changes can we make, what can we learn from last time to really sort of refine and finesse the process. I think that would be my answer to that one. Can't get away from this. We're seeing the influence of chat GPT, even in some face-to-face interviews where candidates might be giving very similar answers and examples. Is this something you're seeing with your candidates, Callie, or other clients?
So I think, I think that ChatGPT is kind of one of those things that everyone's always talking about. And I think obviously in the earlier stages when they're kind of completing online assessments and video interviews, I think it's really hard to kind of stop them from using it. But what we then have is our assessment centres take place now, or move back to doing them in person. So it kind of reduces that risk of them using it on the day, as in all the different sessions that they're taking part in, we're kind of closely watching them. So it's kind of, I think that the likelihood of them using it is probably quite small. We've not seen it happen yet, but it doesn't mean that people aren't going to try. I think it's one of those difficult things, because I think it can be a really useful tool, but you obviously don't want candidates kind of using it as a way to kind of get the job. So it's all about kind of finding, again, a balance and using it sensibly, using it in a smart way.
Yeah, building in those mitigations so that candidates might be retested. There's technology that, that could potentially be used, in those unproctored sessions as well. We're working on some new assessments at Sova as well. But yeah, it's not going to go away. And I think we've also got to recognise, we've said, don't stand still and don't rest on your laurels. Also, what you're going to need from your graduates and your apprentices is going to be changing over time as well, with the advent of the likes of ChatGPT, because some of that heavy lifting will be done for them. So you'll be looking to tap into those more human qualities that ChatGPT doesn't have as well. So it's sort of reassessing any success criteria that you've got in light of the really quick, fast sort of changing environment that we're living in at the moment as well, and recognizing that. Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, we do have one more. How long do you think the apprentice roles should be advertised for or open for applications?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I suppose it's going to depend on kind of what your timelines are, but I think I'm in the mindset that you want to have those recruitment windows not be kind of too long, because that's when you're potentially going to lose candidates. So trying to kind of keep those application windows kind of short and tight. So I mean, for our roles, we tend to have them open for kind of 3 to 4 weeks, which then gets us, I mean, in the current market, that's getting us loads of applications. But that's kind of what we've always gone with, is that 3 to 4 week sort of period. And I think it's all about, I mean, each role is going to be different, but making sure that you're kind of, I guess, going live at the windows where you're going to get the most opportunities. So there's obviously, I think, more specific windows about, depending on the role, for grads or apprentices, that more people are looking for those opportunities. So I think it's making use of those as well will really help.
Yeah, it's just, it's a fine line, isn't it, between having them open long enough, not having them sat there open for so long that you just can't deal with the volume of applicants.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have them open too long, you're going to have somebody apply on day one, and then 6 weeks later, you're still open for applications and they're kind of waiting. So that's kind of the piece that you want to avoid.
And in the meantime, you might have lost them to somebody that's moved more quickly, and then they've put the process. Thank you. Okay, so I think where we're at now is I'd just like to just summarize some of the takeaways I've been sort of thinking and writing as we've been talking, just to try and pull out some of the key takeaways from the conversation. So I think one of the key themes that comes through is communication and transparency, and that really does talk to pretty much every stage in the process. So it's communication with candidates, it's it's how you communicate in a written format as well, ensuring that the job ads are written appropriately. It's communicating with assessors so that they understand the vital nature of what they're doing and the implications of them getting it right. So I think there's a real theme there around communication, which although our communication channels have changed in the last 20 years, it's always been a factor, and it's just adapting your communication to suit the sort of environment that we're working in now, but keeping that at front and center. Even if your communication's done by a chatbot and it's not a human being, it's still got to be a key part of the thought process. I think also a key takeaway from this, I was really appreciative of you mentioning, was around potential as well. And it's not necessarily just looking at a CV, it's looking at what those candidates can bring and recognising what are those coachable areas that you can work with. You know, it's looking for that sort of that you know, learning agility was one of the ones. You know, if someone's got learning agility, then the chances are they're going to, you know, grasp every opportunity that they get once they are, you know, in the role. So I think that was a really useful point to make, and I think link that back to that whole success criteria. We really need to understand what it is we are recruiting for, what makes somebody successful in the role. And you can do that in the early stages, and then doing that in follow-up manner with data as well. I think what's the saying, there's nothing more certain than change. You know, we've got to keep changing. We've got to stay on our toes, and we've got to recognize that, you know, this next generation that are coming through are different to the generation before, and different to the generation that are you know, we're going to be working with in the next 5-10 years, recognizing that technology is changing, the landscape's changing, expectations are changing, you know, the technology and the materials that we've got access to are changing, and just really making the most of those new technologies, you know, and recognizing that we do need to change our processes, you know, on a relatively regular basis. I think D&I is always forefront of my mind, and it really heartened to hear that coming through on the chat and from yourselves as well. Let's never forget that, and let's put that at the, you know, the beginning of any of our design processes and any of our decisions that we make. So I think that they were some of the key takeaways for me. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, Callie?
I think those are the key things that we spoke about that stand out the most. I think you've really covered it all.
Yeah, and loads of actions that hopefully people will take away from here, you know, and there's lots of best practices that you've shared as well. So we really appreciate you coming to this, and also appreciate everybody for using their Valentine's lunchtime to come and talk early careers. And then Georgia's back here now. I think she just wants to say a final goodbye.
I do, and also a thank you to both you, Nicola and Callie, for taking us through what was a very interesting set of conversation points today. Audience, thank you for joining us too. This recording will be available shortly after today, so if there's something you want to watch back, if there's anything that you missed that you want a bit more detail on, there is so much in that conversation. I'm sure that there will be some replays happening later. But thank you again, Nicola and Callie, and everyone. Have a great afternoon and happy Valentine's.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.